Hey guys, I'm Scott Alak. I'm a wedding and portrait photographer, and today I want to talk to you about these Profoto B1 units. Specifically, I want to talk to you about the TTL function. It seems that there's a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of confusion about how these units actually work. A lot of people have actually done reviews and have said that you can actually adjust the flash exposure compensation from the Air TTL remote. And that's simply not how this works, especially not in TTL mode. In TTL mode, the system is designed for you to be able to establish ratios, and ratios only. And you cannot actually do flash exposure compensation from the remote. That's not to say that you can't do flash exposure compensation. You can. You just can't do it through the remote like a lot of people think that it can be done. So I've got a quick demonstration. I'm going to go ahead and show you exactly how this unit works in TTL mode. So I wanted to go ahead and give you a quick demonstration on how this TTL mode works on the Profoto system. And the way it works is TTL is actually through the lens metering. What it's doing is it's actually using the camera to meter through the lens, and it's trying to find the proper exposure. Now, the way that Profoto works is that it will always try to find the proper exposure. It does not do flash exposure compensation like a lot of people think it does. A lot of people who are moving over from speed lights, who may be used to that speed light system, they see these plus and minus buttons, and it looks awfully similar to what you might see on a speed light. And so the misconception is that if you go +1 or +2 or whatever, -1 or -2, that you're actually going to be compensating for the flash exposure by that much. Well, that's simply not how this works. This is not flash exposure compensation. What it is it's establishing a ratio, and it's establishing a ratio between these three groups. And so you have group A, group B, and group C, and it only works when you have two or more groups active, when you only have two flash heads or more active. If you only have one flash head and you're only using one group, these ratios don't work because there's nothing to ratio it against. It's only got one flash head, and therefore you can't really establish a ratio with one flash head. And so a lot of people think that this is exposure compensation, which it's not. And I'm going to go ahead and show you that right now. So what I have is I've got two flash heads. This one is on group A, and this one is on group B, and I've got them both turned on. And so the beauty of this is that you can actually turn these flash heads on and off from the remote, which is very cool. You can turn them on and off. And so I've got them both turned on. I've got everything zeroed out. And so if I were to go ahead and take a shot, I should get the same, which I do. I get 7.2 and I get 7.2. It's the same energy level. Basically what it's doing is it's figuring out what the proper exposure is, and it's splitting the difference between the two groups evenly. Now, the way I said that this works, it works in ratios, not flash exposure compensation. So, for instance, if I wanted this A group to be my key light and I wanted this B group to be my fill light, all I have to do is, let's say I wanted this fill light to be one stop under. So I go to my B group, I activate it, and I can just make it one stop under. Now, when I take a shot, it's still going to try to find the proper exposure. It's just going to find the proper exposure where this one is going to be one stop less than the main light, the key light. So group B is going to be one stop less than group A. And so if I take that shot, sure enough, it's figured out the proper exposure where group A is at 7.3 and group B is at 6.3. So if I go ahead and take this down, let's go ahead and take it down to -2 stops. And so there you see it as -2 stops. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take that picture again. And sure enough, it has found the proper exposure, making this 7.6 and this at energy level 5.6. That's a 2-stop difference, and it's an exact 2-stop difference. And so this works very well when you're trying to establish ratios. Now, Profoto, they've given you 2 stops in either direction. So you can go +2 or you can go -2, and you can have a total of a 4-stop difference between the groups. And so, like I said, four stops is a pretty extreme ratio. there's not a lot of use for 4 stops. When you go in ratio terms, 4 stops, that means that one light is going to be 16 times brighter than the other light. That's a pretty extreme ratio, and there's not a lot of use for it, but I'll go ahead and show you how that works. And so I'm going to go ahead and take this A group up, and we're going to make that +2. The B group is already down at -2. And so if I take this shot, sure enough, there's a 4-stop difference between the two. This is at 7.3, and this is at 3.3. And so it works really, really well when you're trying to, work quickly and you need to establish a ratio, and it will always try to find the proper exposure. It will not, and it does not, do flash exposure compensation with the remote. Now, what happens if you only have one group, one flash head? I can go ahead and turn that off. I'm going to go ahead and zero these back out. So I'm going to bring this back up to 0. I'm going to bring the A group, I'm going to bring it down to 0. And so you can now see that everything is zeroed out, and I'm only got one flash head turned on. And so if I take that shot, I'm at 7.6. It says that 7.6 is the proper exposure. Well, I'm going to show you that these ratios don't work because I only have one flash head. There's nothing to ratio it against. And it does not act as flash exposure compensation, because if I were to go ahead and take this A group and bring it up, let's say 2 stops, and I was originally at 7.6, if I take that shot again, well, I'm at 7.5. It's still trying to figure out the proper exposure. Even though I dialed in 2 stops up here, it's still at 7.5 here. So let's take that A group down and let's bring it down all the way down to -2. And so we'll take that same shot. And now it's at 7.7. It's still within that range of trying to find that proper exposure. It certainly did not undercompensate by 2 stops. This has absolutely 0 effect on the exposure that the system is trying to figure out. The system will not overexpose and it will not underexpose. It does not do flash exposure compensation. But there is a way that you can do flash exposure compensation. You can do it with the back of your camera, okay? So this is a Canon camera. This is the 5D Mark III. And so on the back of the camera, I can actually adjust my exposure compensation right here. Now the thing is that I can go +3 stops and I can go -3 stops. But here's the caveat. It works in 1/3 increments. And even though the Profoto unit works in 1/10 increments, I can only use flash compensation in 1/3 increments, and I can only go +3 to the upside and -3 to the downside. And so let's just say I want to go ahead and dial this in, and let's say I want to make this, well, let's go ahead and zero it out and see what we get. And so I'm going to zero it out, and we're going to zero it out, and we get 6.8. And 6.8 is telling us that's a proper exposure, okay? Now, if I wanted to go, let's say I wanted to go 3 stops under. I'm at 6.6, and I go 3 stops under, and it takes me to 3.8. That's pretty close to 3 stops. It's not exactly 3 stops, but then again, it is using TTL, and it's constantly trying to figure out the right exposure. But what it's done is it's figured out the right exposure, but then underexposed it by 3 stops. And so I can do the same. Let's take it up all the way +3 just to show you. So I was at, let's zero it back out. Let's go back to 0, and we'll establish our setting. So it's back at 6.7. So now let's go and take it up +3. And so now it's at 10. So it's gone 3 stops over, and it's completely overexposed. And so this is how you use flash exposure compensation with the Profoto unit. You do it with the back of your camera because the exposure is being controlled through the lens. It's being controlled by your camera through the lens and what it's metering through the lens. And so this is how this system works. And so if you were to use this with 2 flash heads, so I'm going to go ahead and turn this flash head back on. Let's go ahead and zero this back out. So we're at a 0 compensation. and we go ahead and take a shot, okay? And we see that we're at 6.3 and 6.3. Well, you can still do flash exposure compensation using the two flash heads, but what it's going to do is it's going to do it as a global adjustment, okay? And so you can use a global adjustment, and let's say I'm going to go ahead and take this down 3 stops, and we're going to take that same shot. And so now it took down 3 stops, and it split 3.3 and 3.3. It's 3 stops underexposed, okay? But it did it, and it split the difference between the two heads. Now, here's the cool thing. The cool thing is that not only can you use flash exposure compensation, now I'll go ahead and put this back at 0. We're going to 0 this back out. But not only can you use flash exposure compensation, but you can use flash exposure compensation with ratios. So now I have group A and I have group B, and I'm going to go ahead and make group B, and I'm going to bring it 2 stops under, okay? So I'm going to bring it 2 stops under, and we're going to take a shot. And sure enough, we are 2 stops under. This is 6.7 and that's 4.7. But let's say for some reason I think that the exposure is too bright. And so I want to go ahead and bring it down. So let's go ahead and bring it down. Let's bring it down 1 stop, okay? And we'll take that same shot. And sure enough, it's still a 2-stop difference between 5.8 and 3.8, but it's 1 stop lower, okay? We bring it back, let's bring it back to 0. We take that shot, it brought it back up to 4.7 and 6.7. Let's go up 1 stop, and now it brought it up 1 stop, but it's still 2-stop different. So not only can you use ratios with the remote, but you can also use flash exposure compensation with the back of your camera. And that's how this system works. Okay guys, so hopefully that demonstration really cleared things up, and now you have a better understanding of exactly how these TTL units work on these Profoto B1s. I know that when I first bought these, I had a lot of confusion about them as well. In fact, I had to refer to the owner's manual to really figure this out. So, hope you found this interesting. If you guys have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave it in the comment section below. And if there's anything else that you'd like to see as far as these Profoto B1s, go ahead and leave a comment on that as well, and I'll try to address it in another video. That's it for now. Later.